And we're live. Welcome to the Revo Report. We're conducting these interviews with a mission to be a hub for the greatest thinkers and influencers in Christendom today. And you're in for a treat because I'm joined with Lenny Esposito, president and founder of Come Reason Ministries, a pioneer in Christian apologetics who has been defending the faith through thoughtful engagement for over 2 decades. He's an author, speaker, and a debater. He's been spreading convincing Christianity across the globe by stirring the hearts and minds of the lost and the church for 30 years. A pioneer in online apologetics with his popular www.comereason.org website, which you can see down below. Lenny has also contributed to books such as the award-winning Apologetics Study Bible for Students, A New Kind of Apologist, and True Reason, Confronting the Irrationality of the New Atheism. His articles have appeared in the Los Angeles Times and the Southern California Christian Times. So without further ado, let's welcome in our dear brother in Christ and friend, Lenny. This episode is brought to you by our Revo Report Patreon. Join our community to get first access to interviews, Bible study guides, devotionals, and prayer books for adults, youth, families, and marriages. Plus, resources on Christian living, leadership, sermon prep, exclusive Q&As, online Bible studies, and even one-on-one coaching or counseling. Visit patreon.com/VinceRevo and grow in faith and truth with us.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lenny. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's Friday. I'm ready to tackle all the, Fridays aren't, they're still kind of special, but there's always stuff to do with the weekend. It's not like you're just, especially when it's ministry driven, right? Sundays are always a busy day because it's church stuff. And so there's always, and then you got to edit all the podcast stuff for the weekend too. So it's not quite your day off, but it just still feels like you're at a precipice here that you can kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah. I can relate. Friday for a lot of kind of 9 to 5 people, Friday is like TGIF, but for us in ministry, it's like, okay, we're just getting started. A couple of days, we got a busy day. I have a lot of questions here prepared for you, but I want to talk about your journey from skeptic to defender of the faith. Many apologists have had a powerful conversion story. What was your journey to faith, and was there a defining moment that really transformed you from a seeker to a defender of Christianity?
Yeah, it's interesting because I tell people I was never a non-believer. There was, there was always something there, but so I wasn't ever skeptical in a hard sense. But I'm Italian, and if you're Italian, you got to be Catholic, otherwise the Pope sends you a letter. You're born Italian, you better be baptized Catholic. That's kind of the way we approach it. And my mother said, okay, well, you need your religion, we'll send you to the Catholic school, right? The parochial school. And believe it or not, in listening to that, I'm going to say it's about second grade. I kind of remember, I believe I was saved in the Catholic Church. Now I tell people it's a lot like the Muppet movie. Did you ever see the Muppet movie, the first one?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, Kermit and Fozzie are driving on this road. They're heading to stake out their careers in Hollywood. And there's a great scene where all of a sudden on top of their Studebaker, the great Gonzo lands, bam, right? And they're going like, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm going to Bombay, India to become a movie star. And they look at him and they go, you don't go to Bombay, India, you go to Hollywood to become a movie star. And he says, oh, sure, if you want to do it the easy way. And for me, it's like, you can be saved as a Roman Catholic, but it's kind of like going to Bombay, India to become a movie star. You can do it. It's just not really easy. But because I understood at least the fundamental concept that the Jesus came and died and he was crucified and he was God, I just, I didn't have any concept, especially as a younger child, about substitutionary atonement or any of those kinds of things. But
Right.
it stuck with me enough to say, I want to live in a way that's pleasing to God. So I
Mm.
consider that my conversion experience. Now, it wasn't until many years later when I started going to a Calvary chapel. Actually, it was Greg Laurie's church, with some friends, and started picking up on that I grew into the understanding of what it means truly to be totally committed to Christ, and that's how I kind of came into my own, then wanted to understand more about how to take the Bible seriously, how to unpack some of these ideas that are in there, and grew the ministry actually out of that pursuit. But yeah, so I would say I was saved young in the Roman Catholic Church, and then matured several years later as I started my journey in Protestantism, I guess I would say. So
Yeah. And was there a kind of pivotal moment for you when you went from, okay, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, when you started really standing up and defending the faith, being an apologist? Did that happen kind of gradually, or was there a moment where, okay, I want to be an apologist, I want to defend the faith?
that's so. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I never set out initially to say I want to be an apologist.
Mm.
I wanted to explore the Bible, and this is, like I said, late 80s, something like that, early 90s. I noticed that people would sometimes, when you would read the Bible and you'd read the stories, they wouldn't necessarily, they would read it in kind of a detached way. Seeing Peter, seeing Jesus walking on the water, and, oh Lord, if it's you, call me and I will come out and meet you. And Jesus says, come. And Peter steps out of the boat, starts walking towards Jesus, right? We read that, but a lot of folks read that with the same level of credulity almost as they would read certain fairy tales, or they're just stories, right?
Mm.
They're, and I'm starting to say, well, wait a minute, what does it mean? What's going through a man's head who's sticking his two legs over the side of a ship? He's been a fisherman all his life. He's obviously fallen into the water before, but here he's swinging it, and he's going to push himself off. What's that like in real life? How do
Mm.
we strip away the surface reading of it and kind of get into the meat? And of course, I'd been listening to Walter Martin on the radio, Bible Answer Man, and some of these other guys and so I liked the idea of kind of unpacking this in a deeper way. How do I do this? How do I explore this? Well, now it's the mid 90s, and this new thing called the internet is starting to come out, and I wanted to figure out how to do that. So in 1996, I wrote a website, and I was going to try and explore these kinds of issues. That was the initial goal.
Mm.
But in order to create a website, you need some kind of content. And back then, they had things called BBSs. This is before forums existed. There were bulletin board systems where you literally had your floppy drive and you dial up a local exchange, and you'd find text-based chats. And so I found a Christian and an atheist talking to one another, and I thought that was interesting. So I grabbed his first conversation between them, and I answered the atheist point by point, called it Answering an Atheist. And I basically, that's the first article I put up on my website. And once I did that, he wrote back, and then I wrote back to him, right? And then somebody else wrote another question. Okay, so now we get to explore this idea. And
Mm.
what happened was it became an online kind of growth. It wasn't that I'm going to be an apologist. It's just that I'm having this exchange with people. And apologetics, I learned, was that subdiscipline after I started doing these kinds of things online. So yeah, I was online back in what I call the gray page days of Netscape 2.0, all that concept. It was great. As a matter of fact, people don't realize, I tell kids today, you don't understand, man. Back in those days, you turn on your computer, you press, check my email, and then you'd go take a shower, and you'd come back to see if you had an email.
Yeah.
14 baud modems, and you leave the computer on all night because you want to download the latest web browser. It was a whole different era back then. But yeah, that's so I started online and then began to speak at some conferences, put on some conferences, that kind of thing, and started writing and grew it from there.
Nice. Yeah, I remember those days, the dial-up internets, and we didn't have color in the video cams yet. And the major lags that were happening, you could disconnect anytime.
Oh,
That's
and
remarkable.
then
Yeah.
yeah, you had when the animated GIFs first came out, man, everybody overused them. It was a horrible time of ugliness. It's like, wow, you can have something sparkle on your page, and it was just blown
That's
all over.
right. Yeah, stars. And
Yeah, Alta Vista search engine and CompuServe 2.0. I mean, we're talking like way back in the day. So
yeah, yeah. We were talking backstage about your interaction with a Jehovah's Witness, which got a lot of views on your YouTube channel, which is linked down there below. In engaging like that, I saw you just engaging very calmly. What would you say to someone who is intimidated by that? Let's say a
mm,
Jehovah's Witness comes knocking at their door and they're like, "Oh man, these guys are prepared," or a Muslim, is engaging them, and the Jehovah's Witness, they're trained to to engage, right? The Mormons are trained
right.
to engage. The Muslims are trained to engage. For the most part, I would say that most Christians, maybe even some pastors, are not equipped to engage, and most churchgoers would may be intimidated by moments like that. What's going through your mind, and what what would you say to someone who they want to be able to engage in these skeptics at a high level, like what we saw you did? How can they better equip themselves? Where do they start in being able to do that? You did that on the internet. Maybe there's some people who want to be able to do that in person, online, video, in chat.
Okay, so let's. I want to touch on a couple of things first. Um, Let me give you a story about another time a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses came to me. It was actually Halloween day. It was October 31st, interestingly enough. And we were talking to them, and my first question usually is, um, have you always been a Jehovah's Witness? And most people actually say no. There's been a few who were born into it, but no. I said, and they always usually come in pairs. It was an older gentleman and another gentleman who's a little bit younger. I said, well, can you tell me, your story? He goes, well, I was going to a small Christian church, kind of like you, and we had some people visit us from the Watchtower Society, going door to door, and just like this, it was before a holiday. Matter of fact, it was before Christmas. He goes, and I was a 17-year-old young man, and he shared with me certain things, like, for example, Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. I had never heard that before. And after, we talked a little bit, and they said that they would come back, I went in and called my pastor. And he says, Pastor, I'm talking to some guys, and they say that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. Why are we celebrating Christmas? And the pastor said, are those guys Jehovah's Witnesses? Yeah. He goes, well, oh, you don't have to worry about them. Don't just ignore them. And he hung up. And he said, I stopped and I thought, wow, if my pastor is lying to me about this, what else is he hiding from me? And he began to follow the witnesses. So not engaging can be actually detrimental in some respect. Now, I'm not saying that you have to come out and know everything all the time. But that's just one story of saying, ignore them, hide, go away. It's not necessarily the best approach. I understand how people want to put their best foot forward. And I also understand how these things can be very, very emotionally charged. But here's a couple of things that we need to understand. First of all, everybody should have reasons for why they believe what they believe. If you just take something at face value without any kind of understanding behind it, most people usually have some kind of understanding. A lot of belief is caught rather than taught. You hear your friends say it, or it looks good in a film or something like that, and that's the belief because you're at net zero. Okay, that sounds good, and then you move on until you've explored it a little bit more. But you need to have some kind of belief for your faith, but that includes your interlocutor, the person that you're speaking with as well. So my first rule in witnessing to folks, first of all, is slow down. Okay, you don't have to try and get to the gospel message in the first 30 seconds. And secondly, ask more questions, make fewer statements. You need to, what happens is when you start asking questions, you can find out a lot about people, and you can hear them in areas and in ways that you may not have thought about before. So there was a lady who came to the door with her daughter passing out watchtowers. And believe it or not, I don't get that many Jehovah's Witnesses. As a matter of fact, I usually have to move around because once they find out where I live, they kind of X off the address, and I never see
Put that
them.
house on the blacklist.
But this was many years ago. I'm going to say about 10, 15 years ago. A lady came to our door with her daughter. I wasn't home at the time. My son answered the door. And she asked to talk to one of your parents, kind of thing. And he goes, well, my dad's not home right now, but I know he'd love to talk with you. Can you come back on Saturday? Right now, he said that because Saturday was my birthday and he hadn't gotten me anything yet. So he got me a Jehovah's Witness. Anyway, so the lady came in back on Saturday, as she had promised. I was impressed with that. And hi, how are you? I'm, member of the Watchtower Bible Tract. Say, well, I understand. I've done some research on Watchtower and your positions. There's some things that don't fall into agreement with historic Christianity. They always use the word historic Christianity in that regard. And, like what? What do you mean? Well, like the nature of Jesus, whether Jesus is divine or not. And so she starts pulling out the Jehovah's Witness kind of regular spiel. And I said, well, wait a minute. Can I ask you a question? Have you always been a Jehovah's Witness? And she said, well, no, to tell you the truth. I said, well, that's interesting. How long have you been a witness? Just a couple of years. I said, okay, well, what changed your mind? What was it about this system, this position that you found attractive? You see, that's an important question, right? What is the motivation that you have? So she said, well, I'll tell you, I grew up with an older brother. Now, I loved my older brother dearly, she said. I really did. He was just the one I looked up to. He goes, but my older brother, he was born with some intellectual disabilities. He was born with some birth defects, and they would cause him to act out in certain ways and do certain things. And sometimes some of those things were, well, kind of evil, kind of unspeakable, kind of cruel. But I love my older brother. We had this relationship. Eventually, he gets to be an adult, and the health issues he had caused him to pass away at an early age. And it just crushed me because I knew, given the things that he had done, my older brother couldn't be in heaven. But I couldn't stand the thought of him being in hell. So I started off on a religious quest to understand heaven and hell and how these things work out. And after 3 years, lo and behold, I found that Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth about these issues. And so that's why I'm a witness. Okay. So now, if you understand anything about the Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe in annihilationism. So once you die, you cease to be. They don't believe in hell. Okay. So if you know that, if you're at least well read enough in the basics of what Jehovah's Witnesses believe to understand that they don't believe in hell, if engaging this lady in Granville Sharp's Rules of Greek Grammar to show that Jesus is actually God, is that the place to start now? Or does my entire conversation switch over to the idea of, what is necessary for someone to be redeemed, even from actions in the past, or are they, accountable? What's the age of accountability? Does that imply something in terms of men? Right? I can talk about faith and forgiveness in historic Christianity, and that's going to go a whole lot farther than it is with these guys. So that's part of the issue. Like, why do you believe what you believe? What can you tell me more about that? And what happens is, as you continue to ask questions, two things occur. First of all, you're not making any claims. So there's not like, I have to defend this, right? Christians always think that they have to answer every objection that everybody throws at them. Well, what about the problem of evil? And, how did Adam get his, or how did Cain get his wife? Or, what about, et cetera, et cetera. And there's usually, you could throw about 5 or 10 objections on most of them are usually smoke screens. But, in the reason giving game, it goes two ways. You get to ask questions of their faith. Well, why do you hold to that? What does that mean in this instance? How do you understand this position? Because if you know Christianity really well, if you know your belief system really well, then you can start spawning the counterfeits, right? It's Walter Martin used to say this all the time. It's the folks at Scotland Yard, when they're investigating counterfeit bills, they don't train their folks on all the different types of counterfeits that are out there. What they do is they sit with them and they let them feel what a real currency note feels like. You look into what the real is, and then any deviation from that you can spot right away. And so that's one of the better approaches. And you need to know the basics of things like, okay, Jehovah's Witnesses, they link Jesus with Michael the archangel. They, Christ coming back invisibly. All of that kind of stuff can come out, but familiarize yourself very, very deeply with the real. And then you can talk with a Jehovah's Witness, a Mormon, a Muslim, you can talk with even a skeptic or an atheist. You can talk with everyone as long as you know the real intimately. And it's beneficial. You're still growing in your relationship with God because you're growing closer with him as you understand the real. So that's the first thing, is ask more and more questions. Take what I call the second grade class photo approach. Remember your old second grade class photos? You have the whole group of kids there and a teacher was standing on either end, right? Or camp, summer camp. A lot of times nowadays, kids go to Christian camp and they take the camp photo, right? And then you get the camp photo passed back to you 3 weeks later, something like that. What's the first thing you do when you get that photo?
Look at yourself.
Look for yourself. Why do you look for yourself? You're the most interesting person you know. You're the most fascinating guy you've ever met, right? Yeah, that's why you look for yourself. And so if your conversation is about them, they're not going to shy away. They love that stuff. When I take students to Berkeley, or we'll go to Salt Lake City and go to Temple Square, stuff like that. These are the kind of the things that we help students do, is we have them ask the other people about their beliefs and how did you come to that conclusion, and what do you mean when you claim this, and can you give me more information? And what you'll find is that most people can only go one level deep. They may have this first response, but beyond that, they actually have to think about things, and they may not have as good a grounding in their faith system either. And then it becomes not quite as scary anymore, because you can start to see the cracks in the facade. So understanding that we're all kind of frail, fallible. If you start to feel the blood boil a little bit, you can say, hey, maybe we should I tell people, if you're online and you start to hit the keyboard kind of really hard, that's the time when you're pounding on your response. That's the time to say, you know what? I'm kind of getting worked up about this. The emotions aren't going to help us in this
Mm.
conversation. Let's continue at another time. But
Yeah.
ultimately, one of the prayers that I always have is, "Will may Lord, may you let me see these people the way you saw them." Uh, you know,
Mm.
Sheep without a shepherd, right?
Yeah.
The blind leading the blind.
Mm.
They're not. You don't get angry anymore. You're kind of broken for them, and
Yeah.
that's something else I think that we need to approach. So
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. I want to go into now, you talked about we need to know what the real bill looks like to know what a counterfeit looks like. And we live in a day and age now where those lines are getting a little bit more blurred than
mm,
perhaps in the past, where now people are asking, okay, well, is the prosperity gospel the real gospel? Is the hyper grace movement the real gospel? There's, of course, Andy Stanley is it still the real gospel if we've unhitched from the Old Testament? There's liberal ideology creeping into the church, the emergent movement. There's Hebrew roots movement, which is on the other side of license, right? Ultra legalism. What do you have to say about that? How can Christians really be able to discern, okay, this is, I should be at this church? I mean, maybe there's
mm.
some Christians out there who are at North Point who follow Andy Stanley, um, who maybe are watching, um, really feel good preachings, and they say, well, you know what? I'm just watching this because it makes me feel good. It's for encouragement. I know that you say that that's not the real gospel, but I get encouraged by it, I should watch it. Um, what advice can you give to Christians really wanting to know, okay, am I really listening to the gospel here, or
Yeah.
are the lines blurred right now?
Well, this is nothing new. Uh, since Christianity's inception, the enemy has only two approaches to
Mm.
attack the faith. They either persecute or he perverts, right? Poisons. He either corrupts from within or he condemns from without. And so the
Mm.
church has always gone between the church being the persecuted church or the church dealing with heresies issues. Even in the biblical days, right? What happens in Galatia? Why does Paul write the book of Galatians? Because there have Jews coming in who are trying to say, no, you can't be a Christian until you're Jewish, and you have to follow the Jewish laws. And Paul takes a pretty hard stance on that, right? Who has bewitched you, foolish
Mm.
Galatians? So this has always been the case, and it is important for us to be vigilant on these things. Couple of things. First of all, one of the issues that we have modern day is, you say, feelings driven understanding, and I get that we're living in an era of deep fakes, AI, and everybody is what I call Pinterest perfect, right? We do this as Christians. You have the coffee cup and the Bible open with the pin right on top and the journal. Morning devotions,
Perfectly framed. Yeah.
hashtag blessed, right? Now everybody, it's a funny world, because especially the young generation, they all understand that that's just inside the frame, right?
Mm.
They don't You don't see the unmade bed and the kid with the full diaper off the corner, laundry stacked up. You don't see any of that outside the frame, but we just would look at. However, they do use that as a yardstick as to what their life should look like.
Mm.
So it's almost like I can be lied to in any visual medium. I can be lied to in any written medium. What can't lie to me is the fact that I feel the way I feel. So we have elevated feelings to a truth claim almost, which is completely wrong, because feelings aren't necessarily true. I mean, it's true that
Mm.
you feel those things, but they're
Yeah.
not necessarily giving you an accurate picture of reality. So, for
Mm.
example, talk to any 12-year-old girl who's gotten her first crush, right? Who's practiced 30 times writing Mrs. Jane Smith because she likes, Doug Smith across the hall, right? And your mom would come in and she'd tell your sister, honey, no, you can't go see this boy. You're not old enough. You don't know, Mom. He loves me. Or maybe he doesn't pay her any attention. I'm so broken. He's out with Marcia, not me, and I can't believe it. I'm just devastated, honey. It's not a big deal. But I love him. You just don't know how I feel. And the mother always says, you know what? I actually do know how you feel, and this really isn't love. You think it's love because it's the most powerful thing you felt to date. But when you grow into it, when you understand what real love is, you'll know that that's not real love. Our feelings can lie to us, and they often do. So, but we place too much emphasis on our feelings, and feelings are not good truth tellers. They simply aren't. So we have to be careful in there. Secondly, I think, as I said, there's, even Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun. And when you look at the history of the church, most every issue that we're talking about and that we'll run into has been dealt with at some point in church history. So take Andy Stanley in the Old Testament. Well, there was a guy in the 2nd century called Marcion who was very kind of anti-Jewish. He thought that the God of the Old Testament was this mean, vindictive, kind of, cruel guy, fire and brimstone, and all these things, right? Slaughtering the Canaanites. Anyway, Marcion did not he liked Paul. He said that I like some of Paul's letters and things, but he did not like the Old Testament God, and he would reject most of the Old Testament as scripture. So here's the Marcion heresy happening in the AD 160s, 170s. And the church had already answered that. Paul, like I said, had already answered the issue with Galatians even before that. We've got issues even in Romans where that same point is being brought up over and over again. But Christians, for some reason today, evangelicals think that Christianity really only started at the Jesus movement. And prior to that, we don't really have to worry about much of our history. But if you understand church history, then you can really see where this system has, been tried and found wanting before. Heck, Jehovah's Witness, Arianism, the Council of Nicaea, right? 1700 years this year. Yeah. We're celebrating the anniversary of the Council of Nicaea.
That's
Arianism holds so much in common with Jehovah's Witnesses. What about transgender movements? Well, have you ever understood what the Gnostic heresy was about? The idea that there's a real self that's a spiritual self, and this body that I have is just an appendage. It's just an accessory that I can change or manipulate in order to reflect the real me. So you have this Gnostic concept. Again, these are all very, very early within Christianity. And we just don't do a really good job of understanding and knowing where our history is. And we can find more about the problems of today by looking back at those kinds of things. So we do need to, understand what is going on, what these folks are saying. But I don't think saying, if it's false and it still feels good, sooner or later, it's going to lead you someplace that is going to be a problem. And it's going to be harder for you to get back. I mean, it's the exact same excuse that those who eventually get addicted to drugs, for example, fall on, right? After a while, the feel good wears away, or you need more and more of the bad side of it in order to keep that feeling sustained. And it eventually can damage your life.
Wow. What would you say the prosperity gospel falls in? Because you mentioned about how, certain movements today, let's say the Hebrew roots movement, Paul addressed that in Galatians, let's say, the transgender Gnosticism and, unhedging from the Old Testament. You mentioned Marcion, right? What about the prosperity gospel? Is this a new quote unquote gospel, or is it found also in church history through your studies?
Okay, so let's play this out. Maybe this will be a helpful a helpful exercise. When you say the prosperity gospel, what's at the root of that? What makes that different? What for you? I'm interested in having this as a dialogue. What makes the prosperity gospel different than, say, the gospel as you understand it? What's the defining piece to that puzzle for you? What would you say?
Well, for me, I would say, because I spent time in the New Age movement for a
Okay.
while, and I got out of that, and I can kind of see um, clippets of that in the prosperity gospel, and I think the key definer would be one is centers around man's desires, and the other centers around God and God's desires, and one is
Okay.
more um,
Well, in
well,
what way? Why
yeah.
why are they using the word prosperity, for example?
Mm,
What's the point in that? What are the claims that folks like Kenneth Copeland and Kenneth Hagin and those folks are making? What
mm,
they right? The idea is that God wants to bless you,
mhm.
and in order to be blessed, you have to do what? You have to name it and
Name
claim
it,
it.
claim it. Mhm,
Okay, you have to speak it into existence. Okay, so two things are going on here. It you are what is your concern? Your concern is, as you say, for yourself. You're self-driven. Okay, and secondly, you are using words and actions to control God, to tell God to do things for you. Has this any precedent in church history? Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm going to leave aside what magic, what Wicca, and these kinds of even New
ah,
Age idea are, that you have spells, you have incantations that you say so that the spiritual entities will obey you. Right? They
mhm,
have to abide by this. Let's that that may ruffle people's feathers, so I'm not going to go that far. But there is in the book of Acts a magician by the name of Simon who
mhm,
sees
mhm,
Peter and Paul doing certain works by the Holy Spirit, right? And what does he
mhm,
say? Hey, I want to give you some money. I want to buy this power so I can use it too. Now, is he interested in glorifying God? No, he's interested in profiting off of the thing.
mhm,
And that's where the problem starts. Again, so this is nothing new. It's manifesting in a new way where people are throwing the Christianese cloak on them.
mhm,
But here's what you have. You have people who are driven by self-interest rather than selfless interest. God is love. We know that fundamentally. What does love mean? Love means selflessness, a
mhm,
good substitute for love, right? Because God so loved the world, he sent his only son.
mhm,
Jesus saw equality with God not something to be grasped, but emptied himself and became a man. So it's all about not me. And the fact that the prosperity gospel is focused more on me
mhm,
becomes an issue, right? It becomes
mhm,
antithetical to the idea that God is love. And also, God is God. He's sovereign.
mhm,
If I call you Lord, the servant doesn't tell the master how to serve him, right? That's backwards. That's
mhm,
so you're not actually claiming Jesus as Lord. You're claiming Jesus as your servant, or God as
mhm,
your servant. You have to do these things if you do them this way. So you can start to see the whole thing starts to unravel if you understand the basic characters of God and the basic characteristics of what the prosperity gospel has at its root. I mean, this is kind of fundamental to why it's called prosperity. So
mhm,
these are some of the things that I can, again, you start pulling it apart. What does it mean? How does it how do we understand it? And you can start asking people who are involved in that, why this, and unfortunately, many of the people who are going to those types of churches are really driven by their self-interest. They're not, Jesus says, hey, foxes have
mhm,
holes, birds of the air have nests, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Jesus did not, he was not in a house, right? He was traveling and sleeping under the stars. He was subsisting simply on the benefit, the um, gifts the charity of the women in his ministry. So it becomes again something of what did he do? He forsake his self-interest, and sought the interests of others, and it just so it gets the gospel actually backwards.
Hmm. And what would you say to someone who is trying to find the balance there between? Sometimes I'll have a conversation and people will say, "Well, God, you know, doesn't God love me, and isn't He my Father, and doesn't He want to give me these things? Doesn't He want to bless me? Doesn't He want me to be okay as a heavenly Father?" And what is the balance between? Okay, well,
Mm,
yes, of course, God wants us to ask for our daily bread, but also God doesn't want our daily bread to be our God and to be
right.
the center of that. What is the balance for Christians trying to find, you know, maybe not walking on the line, right? But really trying to honor God in their worship to Him, but also, acknowledging that, yeah, they've got needs as well, and they've got prayer requests, and they also know that God loves them and wants to give them the things that are good for them and take care of them.
Sure. And Jesus actually says that, right?
Hmm.
You being good men, would you give a scorpion to your child if he asks for right?
Yeah.
If you ask for bread, would you get a stone instead? These are the things that Jesus actually said. But there is a difference, or there's a caution
Mm.
that we never look at ourselves as individuals who maybe have more to know than we think. So we need to look at ourselves as 2-year-olds walking. And if you're a 2-year-old asking your dad, yeah, Dad, would you pass me dinner? That would be one thing. But if you say, Dad, can I have chocolate cake for breakfast? He may say, no, oh, you don't love me. Or right, kids do this. I
Mm.
want that bicycle. I want that. No, you can't have the bicycle. Dad, you just don't love me. You don't understand. Why aren't you giving me what I want? Right. And sometimes that's what it comes down to, because
Hmm.
maybe God's looking into your future and saying, you know what, there's better for you. There's things you need to work on. There's, oh, go out and look at poor Johnny. He's sweating. Go out and mow the lawn instead of him. He's like, no, Johnny needs to learn that um, some of these things are effort driven, and that you can't just get everything. The worst thing you can do to a
Mm.
child is give him everything he wants. That's how you
Hmm.
spoil a child. That's
That's
exactly
right.
how you spoil a child. The other interesting thing is, I come from a family, we were interested in hockey. My son played hockey and liked to see hockey. One of the first things, by the way, that they do when you're learning how to play hockey is they make you fall. They make you fall. Now, why do they make you fall? Because in a game, it's ice, you're skating, you're going to fall. And in order to learn how to fall so you don't hurt yourself, as well as learn how to get up after you've fallen and continue to play the game, right? If you fall and you just lay on the ice, you're no good to anybody.
Mm.
You have to learn to fall in order to learn how to get up again. And
Yeah.
so many people in our culture today think that we should never fall. We should never have
Mm.
difficulty. We should never have struggle.
Mm.
Uh, and
Wow.
the fact is, if you don't learn to fall, then you'll never learn to get up. And as a parent, one of our plagues in our society is our helicopter parenting. We never let our kids fail at a test. We never let our kids, right? And then what happens is they never learn how to push themselves higher, how to make sure the details are correct so that they can succeed more fully down the road. And we take this into our prayer time as well. So while God wants you to succeed, and sometimes He will ask, bless you,
Mm.
then there is times where He wants you to learn and grow from it, right? Corrie ten Boom famously said, I never pray and ask God to get me out of the trials. I always pray to ask God, make sure I learn what you're trying to teach me through the trials. Now, here's a
Yes.
practical thing. Here's a practical thing for you guys. When I do my devotions, everybody has a prayer journal. Usually, sometimes it's in your head, but there's a time for praying for specific things, specific requests. Okay, and I recommend people, if you really want to do this is a fascinating exercise. Write a date, write your prayer request. okay, on your prayer journal, and keep that day to day. But I want you to draw a line down the center of the page. And on the right-hand side, the left-hand side is request. On the right-hand side, you write response.
Mm.
And then when God answers that prayer, Lord, I hope I have this new job. Lord, I hope things go well on our trip, what have you. When God answers that prayer, put the date and put the answer. Because when you're especially in these periods of trial, when you're in these pressure points, it's so easy to forget how faithful God has been. But you can open up that prayer journal and then you can start then paging backwards and go, look at all the times God actually did answer me in the affirmative. Look at all the time. Oh, he answered me, 3 years ago, I prayed for that and he said no. Oh, I'm so glad he did it. I really
Right.
wanted to marry that girl and I just saw her at the 10-year reunion and oh, I'm so glad I didn't marry that girl. So we are very myopic in our views.
Yeah.
We're always looking to, I want this next thing, but we forget about. So I think that's a good way to keep the balance because you forget how good God actually is.
Beautiful, beautiful. We were meeting with I think just a couple of weeks ago. I was preaching at a church and met up with some fellow church planters there, and the wife all took out her prayer journal too. She was like, "Okay, what date is this?" And then she has that as well. There's a yes, column there. There's a no column, and then there's a wait column there. And yeah, it's really beautiful if you just are able to see over the years, wow, God has said no, and that was for my good. But he said yes to this. And for this one, maybe he's saying, wait. I like to use the analogy sometimes at our church where, sometimes that 10-year-old would want to drive a car. Dad, can I drive the car? Can I drive the car? I want to drive the car. But would you be a responsible dad to that 10-year-old to say, you know what? I love you. So I'm going to give you the car keys. You go ahead and drive that car. You wouldn't, right? Because it would not only just put him in danger, but it would put others in danger as well.
Right.
And sometimes God, of course, does want to bless us and God wants to provide for our needs, but maybe it's not time for that car yet because he knows that if he gives you that car now, you're going to run over some people and you're going to hurt yourself. And so you're just waiting for
and
us
you won't
to
have
grow.
that car much for the future either. It'll be
There you go. Yeah.
momentary glory and a lifetime of walking to the bus after that.
You got a total car. Yeah. We talked about weaknesses and you're writing a book on superheroes and scripture and how even superheroes have weaknesses. Can you tell us a little bit about, this book that you're connecting superheroes with apologetics?
Well, it came about, the idea came about as I started analyzing. I was always a big superhero fan as a kid. There's an inherent sense of justice that resonated through those characters and things like that. And it wasn't until I actually started investigating not merely Christianity, but how Christianity influenced and changed our culture that I started to see a fascinating point that was developed. And what I found is that the superhero genre in and of itself is actually explicitly Christian. It can't work in any other worldview. And let me explain what I mean by that.
Whoa.
All cultures have had heroes and hero myths, right? Joseph Campbell, although I have some significant disagreements with him, kind of talks about some of these things. And we read them in school, right? The Iliad and the Odyssey, or Jason and the Argonauts, things of this nature. And the Norse god myths, and all of these things exist. But for most of society, across most cultures, those myths usually centered on a person of aristocracy, okay? So Oedipus, for example, is traveling back in order to become king again, and he has to face, right, the question. Or you have again Achilles, who's fighting, or you have Ulysses, right, in the Odyssey, who's trying to either win the Trojan War, get back to Penelope, the Odyssey, all that stuff. They're always a person of aristocracy. They're always trying to either attain their proper status back again, or like Jason and the Argonauts or something like that, they're trying to go on a quest where they can better themselves, get more gold, get more grandeur. And this isn't necessarily what the superhero does. All of a sudden, the superhero flips the script. So Kal-El, for example, if you saw the film Man of Steel, he could be ruler of the planet. Matter of fact, this is what General Zod tells him. He goes, these humans that you worship, these are nothing. These are weak people. We could be gods on this earth. But Kal-El forsakes that in order to save the little old lady walking across the street, right? When we watch Spider-Man, we don't want Peter Parker to win a wrestling match just so he could buy a car. No, we know with great power comes great responsibility. Oh, and by the way, where have I heard that before? To whom much is given, much is required. It's a paraphrase of Jesus' teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that Peter Parker has to suffer in his classes and not do as well, and he can't make the date with Mary Jane because he's saving the world, he's being selfless instead of selfish. And the fact that he has these powers, but he is not supposed to use them for self-gain, right? We don't want our heroes to be Hancock. If you remember the Will Smith movie, that was his whole problem. He was self-driven. We don't like those guys. Those are the guys but so that's an inversion of the classic myth. That's the superhero myth. And that only shows up after Christianity becomes dominant in the culture, that you take others before self, that the little old lady, the slave, the person of no consequence still matters, is still an individual, so that's fascinating to me. And then I say, well, that what's interesting is when you try to witness with your friends, a lot of times they have these preconceptions of Christianity that a lot of times throw up barriers. But you can go a lot farther if you take them and watch a superhero movie and use that third party as leverage to get these same Christian concepts across, because they want the hero to win. Again, they don't want Peter Parker to let the thief just get away with it, for example, but they don't want him to take personal vengeance on the guy either. Again, it's a very Christian idea. So in Man of Steel, for example, there's a great scene where Clark comes into the church of his hometown, and there's a pastor kind of sweeping. And he says, at this point in time, General Zod is demanding that he turn himself in. Otherwise he's going to wipe out the earth. He's going to start killing people. And Clark tells the pastor, that guy that they're asking for on the radio? Yeah. He goes, well, that's me. What do I do with this? How do I understand this? Right. And when he's asking that question, there's a stained glass window in the shop behind him. You know what the stained glass window is? It's Jesus praying at the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, this cannot be clearer.
Wow, really? I didn't notice that.
This is not even, he's as a kid, he's reading The Republic by Plato, where the idea that the world should be ruled by philosopher kings is, so it's very replete. And these kinds of ideas come up all the time. So I have talks where I pull this out, and how you can, for example, the problem of evil. People say, well, why does God allow people to be, taken by disease or killed in earthquakes or things of that nature? Can't God at least stop that? Moral evil is one thing. Maybe, we can round up all the murders, but natural evil, that's God's fault. I said, well, okay, how do you stop people from being killed by storms and tsunamis? You can't not have storms. You need the weather patterns. You need plate tectonics in order to make life, just pure and simple. So these things have to happen in order for life to exist. So how do you make people not susceptible to these things? Well, you'd have to make them impervious to disease, and have to make them impervious to being stabbed, and impervious to having being crushed or things of this nature. You'd have to make them into General Zods.
Right.
So now what do you do with a person who's got an evil nature like Zod, but you can't catch him, you can't hurt him, you can't, What do you do with a world full of General Zod's? How much evil would proliferate in a world of General Zod's? So here's just one example, and there's several different objections to the problem of evil that we can go through. But this is the idea that you can start to pull these things apart. That there's the idea of the selflessness reflects the crucifixion, resurrection of Jesus, why he gave himself for us. All of these concepts that we talk about in Christianity can have a mirror kind of in the superhero genre. And it's a great way to open up discussions with folks. And, what about Thanos? Hey, he was just an ecologist. He just cared about the climate and of the earth, and the universe is getting spoiled by too many people. So we'll just cut it in half. That's, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it, Thanos wasn't necessarily evil for evil's sake. He was trying to preserve something, but he felt that humans were as expendable as any other portion of the universe. He didn't find they had any special status. Does that make him a villain? And what does that mean? Because only Christianity really holds that concept together, that we have dominion over the created order.
Right.
So you see these kinds of ways that we can talk about.
Yeah. Wow. That is cool. I've never thought about it that way. We were talking backstage about it, and I never thought about Thanos, right? He's putting the environment ahead of the people. And so, or the balance in the universe, etc.
Right.
And so the ends really justifies the means, right? Okay. Let's cut the population in half. Wow. Interesting. Very interesting. Which superhero story to you most powerfully illustrates the gospel message?
Well, clearly the Superman story has the most immediate way of drawing that analogy, and the two guys, Siegel and Schuster, who came up with it, were both Jewish. So they obviously had a deep Judeo influence in it. They crafted it as a Moses story. Moses in the Ark and the bulrushes is the same as the rocket being shot from Krypton to Kansas. So it's very much a Moses tale, but they also recognize that because they grew up in the 20th century United States, that in Christianity was so dominant that, and to be fair, Moses is a foreshadowing of Jesus in this life as well. So I would say Superman's the easiest to do, and Man of Steel makes that point over and over again. In some of the camera shots and things like that, they show how he again humbles himself and becomes as a man and lives his life to get sand kicked in his face and to be abused by his co-workers and dismissed and these kinds of things. So that's the easiest way. At least in the film and in some of the comic versions. Now things are starting to change. I grew up with what they called the Silver Age, I guess, of heroes in the 70s and in the comic books and things like that, where there was still, Batman had certain parameters put upon him, like he would never use a gun because his parents were shot. And through the 90s and 2000s, and when they started to make things grittier, although I love The Dark Knight, I love those films, and that question shows up even there. Should one man become a villain to save the rest of society? Right, that's the big question in The Dark Knight, which is exactly what the Jews did with Jesus. It is. What does the high priest say? It is good that one man should die so that the rest should be. The rest should be saved. Right? So same concept. But Superman, I think, would be the easiest parallel. And then, but all of them have certain aspects that from which you can draw some of these different issues.
Wow, that's cool. When is that book going to be coming out? How far along are you?
I actually had to put it aside because I'm working on another project on Islam right now, which I'm hoping to finish this year. And then but I do have some talks that I've done on my YouTube channel about Christianity and superhero movies. Here's a good example. Remember Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man?
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember that the Spider-Man 3, the emo Spider-Man. Now
Yeah.
it got chided quite a bit
Yeah.
by a
That's
lot
the
of
one with
folks.
the
But
venom, right? And he gets
yes,
also,
that's the one where
yeah.
Venom's introduced. Well, fascinating study. Here's a
Mm.
great picture of sin. Initially, Peter gets this stuff on him, and he kind of likes it. It enhances his powers, right? He's in control
Hmm.
of it, but it makes him feel better. Going back to
Yeah.
feelings again, makes him do
Yeah.
things kind of a little bit more sharply.
Yeah.
But eventually, what happens is the symbiote then starts to overtake Peter. It starts to control him. It starts to change his mood,
Hmm.
change his emotions, right? And this is exactly what sin does. When we start getting into sin, we think we can control it. We think we have it under our leash. And then it starts
Wow.
to manipulate, where we start to get more and more driven by it, and it becomes the thing that starts to forge us. Now, what
Hmm.
is the way that sin, that venom, is vanquished in the movie? Do you remember what was the thing that caused him to separate from Peter?
It was the sound, right? Wasn't
It
the
was
hitting?
noise, but what was the actual noise? And it's true both in the comics and in the film. It was church bells. It was church bells. He was in
Oh,
the steeple in church bells, and that was the thing that
that's
actually broke.
right.
Isn't that a fascinating, fascinating
I
parallel? And
never
then, of
saw
course, in
that,
that
man.
same film, you have Sandman and the whole idea of forgiveness.
Right, right.
How can we forgive even when we've done bad things, even when others have done bad things to us? That's the theme. So again,
Wow.
you can, when you start say, how do I explain sin? Here's a good picture, and okay, I get that.
Wow. I didn't have this in my original question, but I do want to get your thoughts on, since we're talking about stories and writers, I want to get your thoughts on Snow White. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know in the history of Snow White, I think also the authors as well were Christians. They were devout
Mhm.
Christians, in fact. And the story of Snow White, you see it resonating with um, a gospel message as well. The story of resurrection, of selflessness, of how love saves, of these disciples, so to speak. Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on that. I know this wasn't in my original questions, but
Well,
do you have any thoughts
and
on that?
I've not seen the new movie. I just,
Okay.
for some reason, I just did not have the drive to see. I've
Uh,
seen the Disney film, the
yeah,
1939
the original. Yeah.
animated, yeah, which is far different in some
Hmm.
respects.
Yeah, way different.
The motivation's different. I think
Yeah.
in our modern culture, again, we're so driven to be edgy that we miss the forest for the trees. We miss those central points, that there's a redemption that can be had, that the hunter um, actually withdraws his hand, and really that's God's providence working through individuals. It's not, doesn't have to be highly mystical for God to save us. It can be just working on the heart of those who want to do the right thing. The problem again with Snow White in the modern context is it became trying to please too many people in too many ways with the modern culture. And uh, Alistair McIntyre, who's a sociologist, talked about things that he calls death works. Death works is an approach of taking something that's established in the arts
Mm.
and changing it in such a way that it loses its hallowedness, it loses its sacredness, it's deforming that which we all understood. So Snow White is a good example of, as you say, this high value of evil is evil and good is good, and evil needs to be vanquished. This is a central understanding of human nature that we have in us. God placed in our consciences this idea that evil needs to be vanquished, which is another
Mhm.
reason why I think superhero movies are always so engaging or attractive, because we all know
Yeah.
that this universe is not the way it's supposed to be. Right? This universe is messed up. We see the murder and the pain, and we have a longing for someone to come in and put it back in right order. And so the superhero movie kind of speaks to that. And with this new Snow White, it gets a little mushy and doesn't seem to make that clarity. So
Mm.
Alistair McIntyre says these death works are kind of doing that, trying to rewrite these understandings that our society held dear and change them to make them not as clear, not as so. Even when we're talking about, and you'll hear this referenced quite a bit in the new Lord of the Rings, I mean, not in Lord of the Rings, in the new Chronicles of Narnia series that they're in talks with right now, where they're talking about having Aslan
Oh,
being voiced by Glenn Close. And it's like, what? You want Aslan voiced by a woman? Wait a minute.
really?
That's not even what C.S. Lewis. No, it wasn't Glenn Close. It was. Oh, I can see her face now, and I'm blanking on the name. But yeah, they want Aslan voiced by a woman, and it's like
Hmm.
you got to be kidding me. Why? And that's not just diversity for diversity's sake.
Yeah.
That changes the entire analog. That changes the entire parallel.
Yeah.
And it becomes dangerous in that regard to start doing those
Huh.
kinds of things, because now you're moving out of society and into something that's going to be corruptible. It's a big problem, I think, that we're seeing in modern art now, that you have these polls, and it's why a lot of these films fail, because
They're tanking.
they
Yeah.
want to, yeah, they forget that people have this inherent drive to see goodness vindicated.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. You're talking about suffering there for a moment, and evil in the world. One of the things that Alex O'Connor really holds tightly on is the suffering of animals, right? Animal
Yeah.
suffering, and how, well, there isn't a sufficient rebuttal to that, theodicy to that. Do you have an answer to that? To animal suffering, and how, oh, there can't be a God if animals suffer, because it's pointless.
Yeah. I was in a debate with a gentleman who brought this up, and this is a subset of natural evil. First of all, it's not necessarily clear that animals suffer in the same way that we suffer. So there's a implication that they somehow suffer as we suffer. Now, animals feel pain. I'm not trying to say that they don't. Okay, but they don't necessarily know or dwell on or are self-reflective of the fact that they're feeling pain. What do I mean by that? If you've ever taken a child to get a shot by the doctor, okay, and if the doctor says, okay, we're going to do something in 3, 2, and he puts in the shot before 1, usually that's the way they do it with the kids, because what happens is when you tell the kid you're going to get a shot, he's miserable before he gets the shot.
Hmm.
When he gets the shot, he says he feels it more intensely, right? Oh, it's horrible. It's awful, right? It's the fact that that the pain's coming, and that the pain exists, that makes the pain worse. And it's not
Hmm.
necessarily true that animals have that ability for self-reflection to even
Hmm.
understand that. So the way that they suffer may be different. That's the first thing. It's also not necessarily known that the things that God allows aren't there for good reasons, and that because he allows animal suffering, it doesn't teach us human beings about things like cruelty or the heinousness of sin, even in those animal areas. Why was the sacrificial system so bloody in the Jewish temple era? They were killing lambs left and right, and you had to be there and slit the throat. It was just a bloody. It's not that God needed that. It's that we needed to see that sin is heinous, and you always seem to underestimate our sin and the heinousness of sin. So I think one of the things that I think is that if God were to reduce the amount of natural evil, it may be the fact that moral evil would be even worse, because there would be more people who were driven to do the things that they do, thinking that there would be fewer consequences. They wouldn't learn the lesson, right? Even people who don't believe, they'll still point to things like karma. Oh, karma is going to get you. Look, we know that anybody at any point in time, anywhere, can fall prey to these accidents because we've seen it in nature. Nature being red in tooth and claw. That's not a good description of how we would come to things like this. And the last thing, so think about it like this. I'll go back to the superhero movies. Let's go back to Endgame. If you remember at the end of Infinity War, right, you have Tony Stark and some of the guys sitting there kind of licking their wounds. And you have Doctor Strange off in the side, and he's like floating there doing some weird stuff. And when I teach this, I actually have I'll do a whole presentation with movie clips, and I'll show this.
Oh, cool.
And so does your friend over there always do that? Hey, what are you doing? He goes, well, I went into the future to view all the possible outcomes of our clash. Yeah, how many did you see? 16,405,000. Okay. And how many did we win? 1. Right? That's what he says. So he gives Thanos, if you remember right, he gives Thanos the stone.
Yeah.
And Thanos snaps his fingers and half of the universe disappears, so to speak. And everybody says, why did you do that? Why did you do that? How could you have done that? It's not until Endgame when we come back and they do that final assault and Tony looks at him, is this the one? And he says, yes, this is the one. And they were conquered Thanos and they were able to bring the people back. They call it the blip, right? So in all those 16 million plus options, the only one that could result in the best possible outcome was the one that had a lot of pain in the middle of it. Where all those people for 5 years were gone, missing, mourned. How could you have? See, we are in the middle of the blip right now. We're not to the book of Revelation yet. We don't know what God's going to do, even with the animal suffering. I think Alex is a little bit, he can offer that objection, but that's not necessarily the best objection. Again, when I hear him and he says, how come God doesn't? I feel it's a little bit like a young child saying, how come you don't do this for me the way I want it? You just don't know what the outcome is going to be. We don't know what success looks like. We think of ourselves and what success looks like for us. So yeah, we're in the middle of it right now. We haven't achieved yet. It's only after the book of Revelation, right? Chapter 20 and 21. Once we get to that point, then I think it'll all make sense. But this is part of the process of faith where you have to say, Lord, I don't know it all, but you do. Dad, I don't know it all, but I'm going to trust that you really do love me and have my best interests at heart.
Wow. You've been in the online space for a long time. One of the pioneers there. I remember I don't know if you remember, there's this website called Asian Avenue, and me being Asian, Filipino, I was on that, and there were forums on there. And I started discussions with Buddhists there and atheists and Muslims, and those threads really filled out. In fact, they became like the number one thread on Asian Avenue for a long time because there's so much interest in it. And so much has happened since, in the 1990s. How have you seen online ministry change the landscape of apologetics now with, the likes of a young Alex O'Connor out there being able to really reach hundreds of thousands, millions of people, and other Christian apologists like yourself come into the fray, being able to go online and have these discussions and have these online debates via, even video chat now. How have you seen it change through the years? And in your opinion, where do you see it going?
Well, There's a couple of different ways that we can answer this. First and foremost, of course, is we've become much more video driven, much more visual.
Mm.
YouTube is the king in that regard. Back, you start a blog, or you do online chat, or like initially I did website articles. So I first published my articles on websites, and then I switched over to a blog where RSS feeds from the early 2000s, mid 2000s, that was the driver. Started my Spotify. Well, it wasn't a Spotify podcast, but it was an audio podcast in 2006. But then I had to, just a few years ago, I said, okay, I'm going to have to move to video for my podcast, because that's where everybody's going. So the look and feel, people don't read anymore. People just don't read. And YouTube is really the world's second most popular search engine. Google's number one, but YouTube is number two. So when people have a question, that's where they go. Of course, with Instagram and TikTok and YouTube Shorts, the idea of you have to have these pithy, quick answers becomes an issue, especially when you're dealing with very difficult topics, and you get a whole lot of people who think that something that you've said in 90 seconds or 60 seconds somehow answers these deep issues that have been wrestled with by great minds for centuries. But people assume that, well, that sounds good and that's all I need, So that's an issue now. Popularity and algorithms are brutal. The best answer may not be on the first 10 results of your web search. Matter of fact, all 10 of those may be wrong, but they're popular because they get a lot of people, and matter of fact, the more outrageous your position,
or dramatic,
the more comments you get on it. And the more comments you get on it, the more the algorithm loves it and feeds it to more people, and it becomes this self-circular in its scope. So becomes problem there. So we have to work at cleaning all of that out, or at least warning people when we're engaging with them that that's part of the problem. It becomes a challenge in that aspect for the apologist to do so, and then we have to also be careful as to who we model ourselves after. Again, we can see popular apologists who may not necessarily have it all right, but they're popular because they're high on polemics, right? They like the interaction and they
aggression,
have takedowns, right? They have good gotcha moments. That's what we're looking for all the time, and that's, again, may I see those who I'm dealing with as Jesus sees them. May God, you break my heart for them the way you broke his heart. I think that's a good approach in this. That doesn't mean that we don't try and grow our ministries. Obviously, we appreciate followers. We hope to do good work and be thorough in those ideas. But that's kind of how we have to. That's one of the modern dangers that we have to guard against.
Yeah. And how can we do that? Because we've had now, I've had some people come on the show and actually talk about that. And we have to realize also that there are people who are following, very sensational kind of channels, very, like you said, more polemics than apologetics, maybe very aggressive approaches, these gotcha moments. And how can we approach that as apologists, and even kind of educate the next generation to be like, yeah, we want to give an answer, but we want to do it also. Let's not forget part B of 1 Peter 3:15, right? To do it with gentleness, to do it with respect, because that's also a way in which we can win people. But I find that, like you said, the algorithm really is pushing towards drama and high levels of emotion and these gotcha moments. How do we set guardrails to that? How do we educate those next Christian apologists that are, maybe it's a teenager coming up who's going to be the next great apologist or evangelist or preacher, to really guard against that?
Well, so first of all, you realize that the medium itself is depersonalizing.
Hmm.
When you drive a car, many people, when they drive cars, will act towards other drivers in a much different way than they would if, say, they were both individuals walking on the street. There's
Hmm.
something about that shield of the vehicle around you that makes you think that those other cars are they're not persons, they're inanimate object, right?
Uh-huh.
And so that shield, I mean, we know this, why is being in a car alone make person pick their nose? I've often wondered. It's like, you've got windows. Don't you realize that there's
We can
windows all around
see.
your car? Yet you think that you're alone. You really think that you're alone. And the same thing is true behind a keyboard or a video monitor. You think that you're
Hmm.
alone. So first and foremost, if you're a person and you're talking to people, remember that that's personal. And asking questions of them. Do you have family? Do they hold to these beliefs? By asking
Hmm.
more questions and what is it about this that really stimulates you, and asking honestly, not again looking for the gotcha, but just trying to understand them. Those steps will help personalize that other individual, so they're not just the avatar out there that you're going to be, switching weapons and shooting with as part of your gameplay. So you need to
Yeah.
personalize that. You need to understand that. Secondly, I think you need to understand that you don't know everything, and it may be okay to say, I have to do more research on that. Let me find out and get back to you. It doesn't all have to be done in this instant. It doesn't have to be done now.
Hmm.
And Moses, for example, God called Moses in order to lead the Jewish people out of Israel. He also called Moses to set down the Torah, the law, the first 5 books of the Bible. Part of what he did there was to send him through Egypt school, right? Moses got trained in the ways of the Egyptians. He learned how to read and write. And
Hmm.
was Moses a good student? Do you think he had to be sharp on his study? I mean, that's not exciting, right? Going to school and learning this, that's not exciting. But if Moses didn't do that, then would he have been as successful in writing God's word that God had planned for him some
Hmm.
80 years later?
Yeah.
David was the runt, so to speak, of Jesse's sons. He was the youngest. Matter of fact, they put him out with the sheep. Now, that was not a prestige position. Nobody wanted to be the shepherd with sheep. You're out for long periods of time. You're sleeping in the cold. You're worried about sheep dung, right? And what do you do most of the day? Well, you pick up your guitar, you write some songs. He did that. But the other thing is you take your sling and you practice. You line up a bunch of cans, because there could be a bear coming, there could be a lion coming, and you practice over and over and over until you get really good. So that
Hmm.
when that bear or that lion comes, you can face him. David could have never faced Goliath had he not practiced for years doing the most mundane things. Again, why is God have me stuck in this little thing? Why isn't he using me for something grand and glorious? The grand
Hmm.
and glorious is God's business. But
Yeah.
you being faithful with the place where you're called today, practicing, learning, growing in that knowledge, understanding it from their perspective. If I was in his shoes, how would I feel?
Yeah.
Personalizing. Those are the things that you can do, and that changes you from just someone who's out there giving the same old answers to someone who's actually engaging and can grow in being used in a myriad of ways.
Wow. I love that. I love that. What do you see are, actually before that, you talked about you're working on a book on Islam, you said?
Yeah, so it's a biography of a woman who came out of Iran and
Mm.
found Jesus at 49. She had an abusive relationship. Her father was an abuser, and then she married a man who was abusive as well. She was always clinically depressed and fell into OCD, all kinds of issues. But then at 49, she'd always had a drive to know who God is, where God is, and Islam didn't provide the answers for her. So I'm writing her story as well
Wow.
as within it kind of interlacing ideas about witnessing to Muslims using that as a basis. And so, yeah, I'm working through that right now. That's hopefully get that out this year.
And I've been speaking with some. I was just speaking with Robert Spencer the other day as well, and some will say that with Muslims, they prefer kind of polemics. They prefer if you challenge them aggressively. David Wood has said this multiple times. Do you see that as well in studying Islam right now? Maybe in writing this biography for this woman, do you find that to be true? Is that just a temperament thing that in every kind of demographic there is someone who would respond better to a little bit more aggression or polemics versus, kind and gentle and respectful apologetics? Do you find that to be true? And also, second part of that, where do you see Islam in the U.S.? Here in Canada, it's growing quite rapidly. We know that in the U.K. and Europe, it's spreading quite rapidly. Robert Spencer himself said that, in a few years, really, the Islam will be the dominant religion in the UK. I don't know if he's a few years or a couple decades or so. We're seeing it seep into the politics. Where do you see the US right now when it comes to Islam?
Well, so to your first question, individuals, especially the more conservative, the more traditional Muslims, and those who come first generation who are immigrants from Islamic countries, especially Islamic countries that have a high Wahhabist or a background in this kind of a more staid and traditional framework. They tend to be more assertive because they see the world, politics and religion and existence are all part of the same package. You just don't separate them, right? Sharia law is Sharia law, both politically and religiously, and everything is in subservience to Allah. So that's just what you do in Muslim. And so when you engage people, you want to engage people vigorously. You want, that means you care, right? If you don't care about things, then you don't show any emotion. So some of it's cultural, but it's also the fact that this is an issue that's central to them. And of course, they're going to engage with it. And when David talks about these things, he's approaching them the way they're used to being approached, even within each other. But he doesn't use polemics and forsake the rational arguments. He incorporates the arguments into the polemicism. So that's so one is technique, right? One is style, but the goal is still to engage with the arguments. And then again, it's never monolithic. You have to understand how these people, each one resonates individually. So you have to engage them, talk to them, ask them questions. Why, I see that this is passionate for you. Can you tell me why? And you can engage in that way. Whereas another individual, someone who had come off of something maybe out of Turkey, might not be nearly as aggressive, and you might want to approach them in a different fashion, something like that. So that's the approach side. Is you still have to take it person by person, but your polemics should never be a substitute for having good reasons. Why do we believe in Trinity and not a Tawhid, for example? What's the arguments for that? I think where Islam is going, obviously, Christianity is still the fastest growing religion on the planet. If you look at expansion in Africa and things like that, part of the problem with Europe is that they've had a huge issue with lax immigration laws. And Islam is a very parasitic construction of a worldview. So you'll always have the haves and the have-nots, right? Even within the oil-rich countries, you have the sheikhs and the folks who have all the money. And there's a underclass of young men who are just frustrated because they can't get any work, they can't get any money. So they come into Europe in trying to work that system. And within the Islamic culture, the Muslim is supreme. You know, the Gaijin or the other folks, the people of the book, as they would call it, you know, they ultimately would need to pay a jizya tax once we conquer them. They see this as their destiny. Their primary mode of conquering now is through birth rates. That's just easy to see that Europe is plummeting. America is plummeting. We haven't hit the point of no return yet. There are certain countries, Singapore specifically, I think they're per couple, they're having less than 1.1 child per couple. Well, that math doesn't work. If you had two people to make one, you're not going to last in your society for very long. It's a couple of generations and you're done. So, but because of the higher birth rate and because of the influx of immigration, there are areas, as you say, in London that basically even the police can't go. It is Islamic dominated. Now, in the U.S., we don't see that as much. Of course, Dearborn, Michigan, and I've taken students to Dearborn, Michigan. We went. That's the largest mosque in North America.
Yeah,
it is highly Islamic, and we engaged and we talked with folks there. But it isn't. We have some safeguards in our Constitution to kind of help that. And then one of the things that makes America a little different is there's an attitude of individualism that sometimes cannot be healthy, but it also does safeguard against the idea that the state should be the nanny to everybody. And there's always a good, a Rocky story, a Cinderella story, right? An American success story you hear. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and things of that nature. So those things are rewarded in this culture, which helps form a bit of a bulwark against the Muslim advance. And the fact that the First Amendment here tries to make this idea of separation of church and state. And I won't go into all the politics on what that means. But because there's a history of this separate identity thing, this bifurcating of faith and politics, it also starts to cleave the ideas in a way that maybe in Europe they can't do. And that's part of the fight that you're seeing today is you have a group of folks who don't believe that. They think Islam is culture, right? There's a certain group that says Islam is culture and you can't disparage someone's culture. You can't say that their culture is wrong because it's their culture. There's another that says, no. We can actually look at cultures and find out if they're wrong. First of all, you think that the European idea of colonialism is wrong. That was our culture at one point in time, or at least in broader Europe, that was their culture at one point in time. You seem to see that's wrong. But we can say things like, female genital mutilation is just simply wrong. Stop doing that. Don't do that. That's not what you can't, it's not all some cultures are actually better than others. And so it comes down to an assumption on the part of a third party will we allow these things to take reign and run in us? So I think that's been a bulwark a little bit against Islam making as much headway in the U.S. as it has in Europe. In Europe, they just don't have that tradition and this idea of separation of faith and state in the same way. So that's helped. But the fight is going on, and if we were to ever lose the concept that there are differences and all cultures aren't necessarily different, aren't good but different. There are some cultures who are actually worse than others. If we ever lose that fight to the relativists, then it's going to be a different issue.
What do you see right now that the church is facing that might not really is not being addressed, that undermines Christianity today? Do you see any holes right now in the church and equipping of the church? Because you're right there on the ground level.
What's the big? I'll tell you what I think the biggest danger facing the church today is.
Yeah.
We don't know. We're not prepared for what's coming. We are not prepared for what's coming. And matter of fact, I was talking with J.P. Moreland about this a couple of years ago. He asked kind of a similar question. This is what I said. He goes, most church-going people today have, and understandably so, they have their church life. They go to their midweek studies, their Sunday studies. They have their group outings. We have our Christian radio stations. We have our Christian websites. And we live in kind of this bubble, this Christian bubble. And we think that because we have in the past been able to express our faith, and by and large, in a Western Judeo-Christian society, we've not had too many problems with that. We've been able to pray on the street, pray for friends, say bless you. We've not had a problem with that. I don't know that level of reciprocity, I don't know if that level of acceptance is going to continue. Matter of fact, the Bible says it won't. That there is coming a day where this will all be illegal. And we're seeing that move in certain sectors right now. But I don't think Christians, they still assume, even though I'm a Christian, it shouldn't really cost me that much. I should still be able to have the good life. I should still be able to live at ease, get a job wherever I want to get the job. We claim persecution. She looked at me funny when I gave her the check that had the scripture verse on it or something like that. That's not persecution. Read what's happening to the Christians in Nigeria.
All right.
You want to see persecution. I mean, they're burning down churches with people in them. They're coming on midnight raids and ripping all the fathers and the young men out of the house. That's persecution. They're jailing pastors for years without a trial. Those kinds of things are, and I don't know that the modern church is prepared for that level of attack. It's really when you get put to the fire that all of the dross burns away, and you're left with only the purities of the metal that you're signing. So that's my big concern. And then, like I said before, just general misunderstanding about what our history is. You can ask Christians. I tell this to my American friends. Look, if you say, what day was the Declaration of Independence signed? What's the Civil War, right? Or who gave the Gettysburg Address? People can answer that. You have to be a good American to know these kinds of things. But if I ask them, when did Luther nail his 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door? Or what's the Great Schism? Or why was the Council of Nicaea called? Not only can they not answer that, they really don't even know where to start. We just don't know our history. And I say, isn't it at least as important to understand the foundations of our faith and our belief system, how we developed Christianity? Isn't that at least as important historically as is our political systems? So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm hoping to launch it within a month, maybe by June 1st. We're putting together a curriculum for churches, for Bible studies, for homeschool kids. This will be 10th, 11th, 12th grade era, where I go through from the day of Pentecost all the way through to the Reformation. And there's and what I do is I take not only Christian history, but I integrate it with theology and apologetics. So I do these things. I talk about Marcion. I talk about the early church fathers. We talk about Gnosticism. We talk about Islam and the rise of Islam. We talk about Augustine and Aquinas. And what you find is all of these things, for example, all of the new atheist objections, the Richard Dawkins stuff, problem of evil, Augustine actually conquered most of that stuff, 1700 years ago. So it's like we could just go to Augustine, but nobody even knows it exists. So this is we're putting this all together in a video curriculum that people will be able to go online and subscribe to and watch the class. And then you can You can
Nice.
do it for credit, or you can just do it as a exercise for yourself or your study group. So that should be coming out pretty quick, and hope to have that
Cool.
out in the next couple of months. Yeah,
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I was just speaking with Ben Lansing, does this artwork of the great heroes of the faith in the past and church history, and how important it is to read up on that. And some of us are guilty of knowing the history of our favorite basketball players or hockey players, and they know where they grew up and what high school they went to, and they know the full history of that, but we don't know the history of our faith, right?
that's right.
And the great heroes and saints of our faith who laid down the foundation of where we are today. And so I do agree that in some ways we've grown soft in our air conditioned churches with our cushioned pews now, and we have all that set up. So I do agree there is a wider body out there, nearly I think 400 million, or maybe even more, that are in high persecuted areas.
Yeah,
That are getting their churches burned down, that are getting their heads chopped off, that are seeing their children killed in front of them because they have decided not to deny Jesus, to not be ashamed of the gospel. And we are, yeah, you're right. We are maybe too comfortable where we are, and I do agree that that is a danger. Um, and some people are saying that, well, it's changed now because Christian nationalism is coming back, and because of what Trump has done, and the executive orders that he signed into place. And one of my pastor friends, who's also an attorney, who said, "Well, that executive order can just be switched around, when the
right.
next president comes in."
Well, you come from Canada. The parliamentary system is that in
Yes,
spades. I mean, it's just
yes, yeah. So yeah, but man, this has been amazing, Lenny. Thank you so much for your time. Uh, I've learned a lot. I'm excited for not just your book coming out on the biography of that woman who coming out of Islam. Has she become a Christian? Is that her
yes.
testimony as well?
She
Okay,
got baptized at 49, which was 2007.
amazing.
And then her family followed suit,
Yeah,
and I met her in 2009 initially, but she came
okay.
back to me a couple of years ago and said, I want to
Yeah.
put all this down,
Oh,
and
wow.
I thought what would be a good option to do. So we work every other week. We get together and work through one of the chapters, and
Wow.
writing it. So it should be an interesting little story. She's got
Yeah.
quite some stories to tell too.
Wow.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I can't wait till that comes out. I used to collect comic books and all the
Ah,
comic cards and stuff, right? I actually, my parents will tell you, I actually stole money from them and bought that. I found out where they were keeping their cash stash, and it was these $20 Canadian bills. And I would find it. I would take a $20 and I would go to the comic book shop, and I would find it. And then years later, I would find out that my mom knew all along. She knew all along I was doing that.
oh,
And I was like, I'm so sorry that I was doing that. But I used to buy these comic books like Spider-Man, Iron Man, Superman, DC, Marvel. And so I'm really excited for that book to come out as well. I hope we can
well,
have you back on
I'll
the
send you a
show.
link to one of the talks I did on this
Oh,
a few
cool.
years ago.
Yes, please, please. And for those that want to get in touch with you, we have the website up
Yeah.
there, and your YouTube channel. Is there any other way, anything else that you'd like to talk
Every
about?
social media outlet, anything / Come Reason, basically. So YouTube /
Nice.
Come Reason, Twitter Come Reason. I don't go on TikTok much, but I do post videos there, and
Okay.
like TikTok Come Reason, Instagram, all of the primary. I even have a Come Reason Second Life. I anytime something comes out, I try and grab the nomenclature just to reserve it. My
Nice.
MySpace is still open. MySpace,
Oh,
Come
is
Reason.
that
You know,
right?
you can, if you really want to go back there, it exists. Yeah.
Wow.
Nobody wants to go
That's
back there though. It's not pretty. It's MySpace is not pretty.
Wow, that's amazing. It's good that you're able to get Come Reason in all of those, because ours
Yeah.
is kind of sparse out. Revo Report, Vince Revo, because I haven't been able to nail it all down. So that's good. Well, thank you again, Lenny. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. And when your other books come out, I hope we can have you on the show again.
Yeah, that would be
And
great.
yeah, it's just a great time chatting with you. So yeah, please check out Come Reason if you want to take some courses. We highly recommend it. Check out Lenny. Follow him on YouTube and all the socials. There's so much to learn. So much to learn. Thank you, Lenny. You're a veteran in the field, and I just praise
Wonderful to
God
be here.
for your ministry.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. God bless you, sir.
We know what the gospel letters said as we have them today. In other words, when we're translating the New Testament, we're translating it from 3rd century, 4th century, 2nd century documents. Okay. So we know what those words are. So your
Mhm.
claim is the corruption happened prior to that, prior to the written word. Muhammad is saying they have the true words of God that you would need to follow. Muhammad's not writing to the 7th century.
Yes.
How is it then that he knows that they have the true words of God? In other words, you're making claims about the New Testament. It's kind of like saying, I have a map to Atlantis and you need to follow the map to Atlantis. Well, if Atlantis never existed, there can't be any map to Atlantis for you to follow. So if the true Injil we don't have, I mean, maybe Atlantis existed, but we have no idea where it is or what it is or how it looked or which way to even point our compasses. So if you say that there was a true Injil, how do you know what it is, where it is, how to get to it? But yet Muhammad says they had the true Injil. The only thing Muhammad had was the very same New Testament that you and I have right now today. How do you explain that? Is the Quran wrong in saying they had the true Injil, or is the Quran wrong in saying that the things that the gospel does say and it contradicts? Either way, the Quran's wrong. Either way, right? And so that's a pretty big issue, I think. This is
Yeah.
again one of the ways that we can talk to them. I've not heard anybody give me an answer to that. So
Right. Yeah. I think that is one of the main arguments as well that they use. And you haven't heard kind of a sufficient answer to
well,
that.
what can they say? They can either say, well, we know that there was Muhammad, he had a special insight into the true Jew. Okay, maybe I'll even grant you that.
Hmm.
But the command is for his followers, even unto today, to give certain deference and certain respect for that. So what are you giving respect to? Again, it's a map to Atlantis. It's a map to something that doesn't exist. You can't draw a map to Atlantis if you don't know where you're drawing or where you're going. So I just don't see how that's escapable. So
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely. I just hit record here because I wanted to hear. I wanted that in there.
uh, polemics and attacking and things like that. So the first thing I
Yeah.
says, I have to tell you one thing. On a Saturday morning, most guys would be sitting in front of their TV watching college football, and you're out here going door to door. I actually have to compliment you on that. I think that's an amazing way to approach your faith. I said, you must, when you knock on doors, hear a lot of reasons for why people believe the things that they do. Right? He goes, well, yeah, I guess. I said, I mean, you hear, well, my family comes from this tradition, so therefore I was baptized into that faith, or it's just what's comfortable, what makes works for me, that kind of thing. Or I'm an American, so I have to believe in X, or All my friends go here and it makes me feel. He goes, I've heard all those too. I said, okay, can we both agree that those are actually bad reasons to believe something? In fact, I hold there's only one good reason to believe anything. And he goes, well, what's that? I said, well, if it's true. The only reason you should ever believe anything is if it's true, because beliefs have consequences and they matter, even if it's a non-threatening belief. I mean, certain beliefs can be dangerous. Some are not dangerous. Take the tradition of Santa Claus, for example. We have this tradition. We teach it to our kids, and our kids believe it. Now, it's not that they believe it on no speculation. I mean, they've got some evidence, right? They've heard it from an authority figure. I mean, the milk's drunk, the cookies are eaten, there's presents, there's some empirical data that they're working with, right? There's some evidence there. But what would you feel? How would you feel about spending 5 hours on a cross-country plane flight next to a 40-year-old man who deeply believes in Santa Claus? Would that make you uncomfortable? Not because it's dangerous, but simply because it's not true.
Mm.
So there's only one good reason to believe anything, is whether it's true. He goes, you're right. And that's why I believe in the Watchtower's understanding of the Bible. That's why I'm a follower of Jesus. And I said, okay. I said, well, let's ask, I want to understand that more, because I've done some research and I understand the Watchtower, and they've retracted certain things that they've said in the past, right? So, for example, and I'm not going to talk to you about, blood transfusions or celebrating Christmas, birthdays, but they did claim that Jesus was going to come back invisibly, maybe 1878, 1914, 1918, 1925, 1940, 1975. He goes, well, you have to understand that they're just men and they can get things wrong. I said, okay, that's fine. I'll grant that. And I don't want to press that point. However, they've also made claims that stand contrary to the historic Christian faith, such as the nature of Jesus, that they identify Jesus as Michael the Archangel, whereas the historic Christian position has always been that Jesus is God and that our salvation depends on his divinity as much as anything else. So what if they're wrong there? What if in 100 years they recant on that the way they recanted on some of these other things? Well, I don't think that they're ever going to do that. Okay, but what if they did? What if they were to find that? What if I can show you from your Bible that Jesus actually is divine? What about, would you choose to believe it? And he said, I've been a witness for 17 years, and it's only through the witnesses that I have the center and the purpose for my life. And I don't think I could ever leave that. And I said, wait a minute, didn't we just agree that that's a terrible reason to believe something? And he literally went, he thought I'd played some word game on him or something like that. We made a few pleasantries and he excused himself. Okay. And so that was the conversation. I would have taken him to the John 1:3 passage that I did in the video. That would have been my next step. So it's about 8 or 10 years later, and I'm at a conference in the local area. And I tell that story on stage. Afterwards, sitting at my table, a guy comes up to me and he says, I was interested in that story that you told about that witness. You know that guy? I said, yeah, I remember. He goes, yeah, that was me. That was me 10 years ago. I'm blown away. My wife is sitting there. She'd heard this story, of course, dozens of times.
Yeah.
Her mouth is agape. And he goes, I didn't become a believer then, but it stuck with me. And it began an investigation that took maybe about 5 years, but then I had to leave the Watchtower Society because of it. And I was stunned. Usually apologetics is normally a very thankless ministry in the fact that you sow seeds, but you never normally see what happens after that. Actually, apologetics isn't even sowing seeds. It's just removing the rocks so that the evangelists can come in and into the fertile soil and make sure that the plants grow well. And it was just, that was one of the ways that God actually blessed me to see that kind of result. And it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. So, yeah.
Whoa. And you have also, do you have a list of those things that they have changed, the Watchtower has changed over the years? Because I know also, right, the crucifixion is not a cross, right? It's not
It's a
a
stake, yeah,
it's a stake.
staros. But and there are ways to answer those things. Those are kind of secondary.
Okay.
I mean, whether it's a stake or a cross. First of all, he says nails. Jesus says, "Put your hand, the nails in my hand." So he uses the plural nails, not a singular nail.
Yes, not
Crosses
one. Yeah.
were very standard, and there's even second century graffiti where people are making fun of Christians, and they have a drawing of Jesus with the head of a donkey on a cross. So these are the detractors of Christianity, making fun of Christianity, drawing
Yes.
the Jesus Savior on a cross, not on a stake. So there's ways to answer that, but ultimately, again, I didn't want to. And you can find Watchman Fellowship is got a really good resource. Institute for Religious Research, IRR.org, which is run by Robert Bowman, who's like one of the foremost experts on Jehovah's Witnesses. He's doing as well with Mormonism now too. So those are places you can go find that kind of stuff. But ultimately, that's why I said I don't want to argue about bloodletting, birthdays. I mean, the Watchtower used to have a cross imprinted on it in the late 1800s on their masthead. It was a cross and a crown. That was their moniker. They used to celebrate birthdays. As the cult progressed, they started pulling some of these stuff away. But really, it's who is Jesus? That's so let's keep the central thing central. The divinity of Christ is the issue, and that's becomes an important driver, I think, in the discussion.
Wow, yeah, those moments must be so exciting to see that. That must have been.
They're far too few, though. Now, again, every once in a while, I haven't gotten good Mormons to come to this house yet. I have to keep moving every 5 years.
Just because they'll blacklist your house. They'll like, don't let Lenny's over.
I had one guy. I remember he literally pulled a list out of his check and he checked the address, looked at it, and he was going to keep walking. And I came out and I was like, "Hey, I thought you wanted to talk. Come on back." Oh yeah, I guess we do.
Well, I can see why. I can see why. So
comes to me and says, "Mom, my best friend just came out as trans," and the mother's like, "Now what do I do? She only has a couple of friends. Do I cut her off from her? But I know how contagious this trans ideology is, and if it's going to, what do I do?" And this is the frustration that people are having now. So a lot of the cultural issues are becoming front and center, and that's so you have to have your philosophy. You have to understand the philosophical problem of evil, moral grounding, all that stuff. You have to have your experience with theology and things like that. But also, Jesus is actually the answer to the problems we face in our society today, culturally, as much as anything else. And it becomes important to drive that home. Yeah.
How do you? I hate to use the word balance again, but how do you balance that? Because some people are, will say, "Oh, don't engage in the culture at all; just share the gospel," right? But in sharing the gospel, you have to answer a lot of these gray area situations that people find themselves in, right?
Well, so again, you don't let them drive the conversation, but you engage them in areas that are important. So if they say, well, I can't believe in Christianity because they hate trans people. Okay, why is that such an issue? Because I hear two things from folks. It's like, first of all, I can't believe that you're making this is less than 1% of the population, and why are you crucifying them? It's like, well, why then we having International Trans Day and all of these pushes for drag queen story hour? If it's less than 1%, if it's such a subset of a subset, then why are you guys driving that? Why is this so passionate for you? Who do you know? Because usually what you'll find is most of the passion isn't intellectual, it's emotional. They know someone. They have a friend, a family member. There's something below that's driving them. That's what you're trying to understand. So it's like, why is this? Why this issue and not something else? All you Christians, all you think about is gay marriage and abortion. I heard that charge all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I said, No, no, you're wrong. What we think about is things like taking the Salvation Army and feeding the homeless and going to disaster rescue and providing shelters and things. That's what we would love to do as Christians. But what happens is you guys are the ones that are coming in and changing the laws. You guys are the ones that are coming in and pushing it in the classrooms. You guys are the ones that are coming in and making it definitive by painting rainbow flags on the sidewalks in the street. We're now playing defense. And this is, again, if you understand the history of Christianity, Christianity has always done this. We've always said, is Jesus God? Well, Arius believes that, there was a time when the Son was not, right? As the only begotten Son, and there was a time the Son was not. We better figure out what that means. Or, Marcion says that these books don't belong in the Bible. We better come up with a list of what the Bible actually is so that we can understand that thing. So Christianity has always tried to react to the culture or to the pressures of the day in whatever way, because we can see it veering, we can see it deviating, and we respond to that. But we need to be good Christians. So I'll leave you with an idea of Tertullian. Tertullian wrote the emperor in Rome as the Christians were being persecuted. And in his apology, one of the things that he says is, look, you are persecuting us for being immoral because we don't worship the emperor. But you know yourself that the Christians are the best citizens you have. We don't steal, we don't lie, we don't cheat. We're not out for ourselves like all these other guys, right? In fact, you prove our point when you take our women and you don't throw them to the lions. Rather, you put them in houses of prostitution. Because you know that for us, being morally degraded is worse for us than being sacrificed. We know that we value moral upstandingness higher than we do death. And you prove it because that's the way you treat us now. So if Christians today would do that, if it's our moral uprightness that is the defining characteristic of who we are, so as our enemies would rather debase us over killing us, that would be quite a testimony. And of course, Tertullian ends that letter with, you can keep on doing it, but the blood of the church is seed. And the more you strike us down, the more we grow up. That's again, so we can learn so much from these guys. And it's an interesting way to do it. But the culture always does filter in, and how we live in the culture makes a huge difference.
I want to get your thoughts on this because I don't know if there's two camps right now or maybe perhaps three. There's one camp who's really pushing, let's push for Christian nationalism, super pro-Trump, make America great again, right? And then there's another side which is saying, hey, this is totally wrong. We're approaching this, incorrectly. We're gonna make them hate us more when a Democrat is in office, and there's going to be a elastic slap back towards us. They're gonna push even harder the next time they're in power. And then there's kind of the cautionists who are going, okay, how do we do this in a way that honors God, in a way that we're not overly political, but we're still able to spread the gospel. We're able to have open dialogue and respectful dialogue while still proclaiming the gospel, but doing it in a way where we're showing also the characteristics of Christ, where they're seeing Christ in us. They're not seeing an enemy.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I'm talking about. The Christian nationalists are, and they're, William Wolfe, Stephen Wolfe, some of these guys who've written the books and such. I've listened to them. I've understood their position. I think they're wrong. I think they misunderstand. Yes, you have to have Christianity in culture, but you can't mandate Christianity as culture. That's their first mistake. It was interesting that in the Reformation, the problem that stemmed from, that was the focus of this was that it was the Pope that was driving the political forays of the world, and power can corrupt, and it was becoming a corrupting influence, and Luther was fighting against that that Christianity had initially understood itself as serving not the God of this world, right? If Jesus said, if my servants were of this world, they would fight. That's not who I serve, the God of the other world. But you don't want to be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. You still have to do the stuff here that he would do. You have to be the arms and feet of Jesus. So how would Jesus respond to certain things? And Luther notices this. So while he decries the Pope and the sale of indulgences and these problems, he also says, hey, the plague is, for example, still going around at this point in time. And Luther says, if you take precautions, you don't tempt God, you don't test God by saying, I'm not going to worry about that plague thing at all, no big deal. That's the wrong way to approach it. You use your mind and your reasoning. But if a brother is sick, if somebody needs your care, then you should forego your safety in order to service that brother. And he writes this during the plague. So he makes this distinction. This is the distinction that properly defines what Christianity is. When the Protestant churches separated from Rome, one of the first mistakes they made is they turned around and did the exact same thing that they shouldn't have done, that they were decrying of Rome, is they made state churches. So you have the Church of Germany and the Church of England, right? And the king is the head of that church, and the Church of Sweden. And all of a sudden you have state churches just broken up into a smaller framework. And that was an error, where religion should understand and feed our politics. Obviously, Romans 13 tells us that we need to obey the governing authorities, for God has given them the sword. They are, by and large, the ones who are supposed to meet justice and provide order. That's what the governing authorities are supposed to do. Paul's writing Romans 13 when Nero is in power, and he was no friend of Christians. But you could say God still gave him that position. Now, when those areas come in conflict with the word of God, when it says you can no longer pray on a street corner, you can no longer go to this church, then you must obey the words of God rather than men. Again, and this is what Tertullian and these other guys says, this is what we do. We live to the best of our ability in the society, but we aren't going to disobey the words of God that we have clearly written out for us, because that is our primary allegiance. So if you think of yourself as an ambassador in a foreign country, you may not agree with all of the foreign country's cultural customs and things like that, but you, for the most part, live within those customs because A, you don't want to offend them, and B, does it really matter? What matters more is your assignment in order to draw diplomacy between yourself and that foreign country. That's what ambassadors do, is they diplomatically negotiate for their country's best interests while not insulting the other country. So we are ambassadors on this world, and this is the way we're supposed to do it. We don't demand, as Christian nationalists do, that you immediately change to my world's view. Besides, nobody's ever going to get that right before Jesus comes back anyway. But at the same time, you don't say never offend anybody for any reason. You still have to obey God rather than men, and sometimes that means being thrown to the lions or being put in the prostitution house.
Right.
It's prayerfully, I come before thee trembling, and you work out your own salvation. So.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, I think this is a real, because we're looking, Canada is looking to the US right now, right? I know there's a lot of pastors over here, friends of mine, who are going, man, maybe we should just jump ship right now and go south to the US, because at least, they're maybe there's still opportunity for Christianity.
We don't know that Carney's going to actually win the election, though, right? I mean, that's not a given.
Yeah, no, I'm surprised that it has kind of shifted, right? Where the liberals took the lead again. So for a while, the conservatives were leading by a small margin, but I don't know. I mean, most of the propaganda here, most of the media here in Canada is liberal run, right?
Right. And you'll see the same poll errors sometimes up there that you see down here. So that happens too. You never know until the vote is actually taken.